Welcome to the Sports, Race, and Society Lecture, which is co-sponsored by Princeton Athletics and the Department of African American Studies. I'm Tara Hunter. I am Chair of African American Studies and also a professor in the History Department. The Sports, Race, and Society Lectures are made possible by the Stephen C. Mills Class of '81 Fund. The lectures and panel discussions explore the intersection of sports with other aspects of American society and culture. They address the obligations of executives who control athletic teams and shape their impact on the nation and the globe, along with the role that athletes play in their respective arenas and their influence as citizens and community members. The first event was held in 2015, which consisted of a panel discussion with NBA Commissioner Adam Silver, New York Knicks General Manager Steve Mills, Class of '81, ESPN analyst Craig Robinson, Class of '83, and Professor Eddie Glaude. And the second event was held in 2019, featuring a conversation by Professor Eddie Glaude with the NFL player Michael Bennett. And so, of course, we had a gap with the COVID years, and tonight marks our third event. And we have three incredible guests with us this evening. And I'm going to give you very, very brief introductions. Please read your programs to get further details about their accomplishments. And I'll start with Swin. She is a member of the Basketball Hall of Fame, having won 2 NCAA titles at UConn, 3 WNBA championships, and 2 Olympic gold medals, all as a player. She was recognized as one of the WNBA's top 20 best and most influential players. Off the court, she has founded charitable organizations such as Cash for Kids, great name. She's got time and cash building blocks, among other impactful community efforts and involvement. Since 2019, she has served as Vice President of Basketball Operations and Team Development for the New Orleans Pelicans. Next, we have Allison Feaster. Allison is a Harvard basketball great, where she was a 3-time Ivy League Player of the Year and led the Crimson to their historic 1998 upset of the #1 Stanford, becoming the first 16 seed to win an NCAA tournament game. Allison played professionally for 17 years, including a decade plus in the WNBA. She is currently the Vice President of Team Operations and Organizational Growth for the Boston Celtics and is active with a number of community and national organizations, including serving on the NCAA Board of Governors. And last but not least, we have Dr. Nyaka NiiLampti, who is a Princeton alum, class of 1997, where she ran track and studied psychology before earning her master's at UNC and her PhD at Temple. She taught at Queen's University of Charlotte, North Carolina, until 2016, before transitioning to a career as the Director of Player Wellness with the NFL Players Association. She currently serves as the National Football League's Vice President of Wellness and Clinical Services, overseeing a program that supports all 32 teams. And I also want to acknowledge Steve Mills, the benefactor of this event, of these series that we've been putting on, and thank him for his support. Steve? Steve is Princeton Class of '81. He was a starting guard on 2 Ivy League championship teams and has had a very long career as a basketball and entertainment executive, among many other accomplishments. So I'll now hand it over to Ford Family Director of Athletics, John Mack, and welcome our esteemed panel to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hunter. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening for this fantastic panel. I'm really excited about our conversation tonight. You guys can have a seat in whatever order you want to. as I shared with them, we were just having dinner a few minutes ago, the goal is to have real conversation, not to give you the polished version of answers, but for them to actually be able to share their experiences and the truth as they have lived it in order to hopefully inspire dialogue, but also to be of aid to a lot of the younger women of color who are coming behind them. So Swin, Nyaka, Allison, thank you guys so much for being here. Before we launch into what you do now, I want to take you back to when you were young girls, just getting into sports. Who were your heroes when you were younger? Or should I say, did you have heroes, and if so, who were they?
Well, first, thank you for having us all here. And I just want to lighten the room a little bit and say that I appreciated all the light when we came in. It's the reason why I put lotion on my ankles really fast. Because some of y'all in here like social media, and I just didn't want to be on the gram. So, yes. As a young girl, my first hero, first love was my mom. And that was because my mom was one of 12. I have 75 first cousins. That was the count, y'all, back in the 90s, so we're way past that. But I always remember waking up and seeing my mom put on these overalls, and she worked for McKeesport Public Housing, and she was always going into work with men. And my mom would be in the mirror, doing her hair, pulling it back, putting a scarf on, putting makeup on, putting on these overalls, these boots. And I remember one time saying to my mom, Mom, why are you putting on makeup? You're about to go and you're cleaning and you're doing dumpsters and all this stuff. And I remember my mom saying to me, it doesn't matter. A lady always keeps it classy. I'm a woman first. And it was so impactful to me because I knew my mom had played basketball. I knew all these things about her, but to see that strength every day wake up and this is who I am, this is how I show up and represent, I just fell in love with that notion my whole life, and so she was my first hero.
You're right, we're gonna leave the most seasoned. She's a month older than I am, I just wanna state that for the record. So I'll cede to you, Nyaka. I'd echo Swin. I'd say my mom as well. I think that I'm just making an assumption here, but probably all, drew a lot of, who we are today from that example our mothers set for us. My mom was raised in one of four, and the third child. As you can see, I need a lot of attention here. One of four, and as a single mom. And so she was, just watching her work ethic, her struggle, her perseverance, all that good stuff that went into how she provided for our family, how she stressed education as really this tangible thing that no one could take away from you, that would somehow unlock, these myriad of opportunities later in life. Turns out she was right. Trusted her word with that. But I would say my mom, and then I'd say also my basketball idol outside of my family was probably Dominique Wilkins. There weren't there weren't any women role models in women's basketball at the time, at least not, on a mainstream level. So we had to look at the greats of the NBA. And so I wore 21 because of him. My daughter now wears 21 because of me, and so on and so forth. His impact, still felt. But I would say those two, personal, my mother, and probably sports, Dominique Wilkins.
I would definitely echo my mom. My mom is the oldest of 6 girls. Yes. And she was also a school teacher. She was a principal at the elementary school that I went to, and I would prefer to it was one of those things where if you get in trouble in class, they would send you to your mother, but they would be sending you to the principal's office. That was not pretty, right? I think I loved her respect for education. So my mom comes from, I like to call her the original black bourgeoisie. Her family owned like thousands of acres of land in Alabama. Her grandfather was a high school superintendent. And so she grew up in an environment where education was the key to everything. And I also appreciated that she had an appreciation for my temperament. Anyone who knows me well knows that I don't have the most tact, and I'm not the most patient person there is. And she would say things like, just because you see things don't mean you need to necessarily say it, right? And so really trying to help me avoid, help me stop making life so difficult, right? I think from an athletic perspective, my hero, I loved watching Kathy Freeman run. She was a quarter pounder for Australia. And one of the things I appreciated was that she had tattooed, I remember her having tattooed across her arm, "'Cause I'm Free," really representing the Aborigines in Australia. And so I'd say from a personal perspective, definitely my mom, and from an athletic perspective,
So for each of you, and I want to touch on something you said, Allison, because growing up in our generation, there were not females, and especially women of color, in the sports realm, or many of them who you could look to. What does it mean to you now to be in a position where you are some young girl's role model or hero, and they can look up to you and inspire to the kind of role that you have? What does that mean to you now?
Oh man, that means everything. I think it's reflected in how I exist, how I lead, how I manifest myself in the professional and personal space. I mean, we have no choice. It's this position, this role, this visibility, this platform comes with tremendous responsibility, and I want everyone to have clear what my purpose is, and that is not only to serve my organization and lead, but it's also to provide exposure, provide opportunity, access, plant seeds for not just young girls, for those who are, traditionally underrepresented in our space, but specifically, young girls and women who are non-existent almost in our space. So that means the world to me.
So yeah, I'll piggyback off of what Allison said, because I think it's so important to take up space, right? It's so important for women to take up space, not because, and I hear this a lot, it's like, let's check a box and hire a woman. Let's not check a box and hire women. Let's hire women because it's good business. And that's where I think Allison and I absolutely exist and prove day in and day out by how we show up in spaces, how we show up to work, how we have conversations about the work that needs to be done. And what we provide is a different perspective a lot of times. I don't think there's anybody that can sit in a room and at a table with us and feel that we can't have a conversation about basketball. That's kind of funny, right? That's happened to me before, where somebody's like looking up at the stars and I'm like, yeah, no, he cannot play. He's just not good. I understand what you're saying to me, but I don't think it works well for this team. So maybe I'm getting a little bit too much in the weeds, but so the basketball piece is hard when people even question that. But then let's start talking about how you're building a team, what you're looking for, what's the culture of your organization. See, I can go have a conversation about what it's like to talk to his mother, to his auntie, to people that influence his life. I can go have a conversation about what it's like growing up in a certain community that he's coming from and the mindset for his, not only himself, but his family, dynamics that he'll have to deal with as he goes along in his pro career. There's not a lot of people that can sit at the table and have those same conversations. So it goes back to my first point about why not sometimes, but all the time, women at the table is good business sense, because it's diversity of thought. And so for me, when I went into the Hall of Fame in 2022, I made it my purpose to not only use my platform to help create more opportunities for women and women of color who look like me, who understand that there are jobs out there that you can get. There are jobs in sports that's not just about playing the game. There are jobs in sports that are attorneys, that are finance. It goes on and on and on. But a lot of times young girls think, well, I don't know how my transferable skill set's gonna work there. Well, it does, and nobody's telling them, and nobody's representing for them, so they just see all these men walk into a room and think that they're the only ones that deserve to be there. And you don't. You don't. And so that's the approach, and I love my sister because we talk about it so much, is that we have to show up in these spaces for a reason, and hopefully the young girl that's passing by or that's sitting in here today is like, oh, wait, you mean to tell me I can get a job? And I can get paid, and I can take care of my family, I can be around sports and contribute? Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because, again, you and Allison have one path where you had the professional career that gives you one level of credibility. And Nyaka, you had the other side of the professional career where you have the professional training for your role. How has that helped you in your approach to get credibility when you sit at the table and try to take up space to be able to rely on your credentials during the conversations that you're having?
You know, I think I'm fortunate. My career, I've worked at every level of athletics, right? So I've worked with young folks at the high school level. I was a faculty member, was an FAR for the athletic department, worked in college counseling centers. Was often the only person in a college counseling center that had a sports psych background. And I was a student athlete, and I was a woman of color. And so a lot of times I was the one that athletes would come in and say, I want to see her, right? I think being able to understand the stressors, both from the athletic perspective and then from the personal perspective, has really given me an opportunity to be able to speak, I think, with credibility at any table that I sit at. And I think as we're getting to this space where there is a growing recognition of how important it is to connect the physical and mental in the sports space, I think all of those things really, again, have increased opportunities. I think to both of your points, part of the challenge that we have, at least in this space, is the idea that you know, trying to figure out how do we make sure that people can see what we do a lot on a larger scale. Right? Part of the challenge with work that clinicians do is that it's behind the scenes, right? And so how do you expose young people, especially women of color, to what some of these opportunities are? And I think for me, as a female of color, it actually is an asset, especially working from a clinical perspective with the men that we work with in the National Football League, right? So most of them have, you know, if you think about the backgrounds that they come from, the first person that they trust is often a woman of color. And so being able to understand that personal challenge, but then to be able to speak to it from a clinical perspective in a professional setting with often, in my role, a lot of white men who are in the medical space, again, I think brings another perspective that a lot of times hasn't been considered.
And can I just add to that too? I'll give an example of exactly what you were talking about. Is I think it was about a year or so ago when the new CBA got done between the NBA and the Players Association. And on our team in New Orleans, we had two players. One was the president, another player was the VP that was working with the union. And it was really, really kind of rewarding to me to be in a position to have conversations. Now, the league and the Players Association are negotiating. You have two players who are playing prominent roles in this negotiation, but they're talking and asking me questions, not because I played, but because they wanted to understand even more so how the WNBA players, I went through 2 CBA negotiations in the WNBA. How are you guys aligning this way? Asking me questions where at times my boss would come and be like, well, what's he talking to you about? What's going on? What's happening? I'm like, there's a line. Can't cross that right now. But what I appreciated about that is that you have two men who are in powerful positions that are working and negotiating, but they want to understand all the nuances and all the different things that not only for me as an executive with the Pelicans, but how I was as a player, what was the mindset, a lot of things that we went through. And your experiences that you go through, sometimes it's not only, it's the education piece, it's the exposure, but then when you're in that position, being able to share those things with them. And so like that was a very proud moment for me in my career because it took me away from what I was doing with the team, but it really locked me in going back. And I always said this, I would never go through another CBA negotiation, and I felt like talking with them, I was backing it again, Allison. And I had promised myself after doing 2 in the WNBA, I was like, oh, I don't want to go down this road again. But it felt good to see them finally finish that out and be able to feel comfortable coming to someone that they felt they could have that open dialogue with.
Can I piggyback on that, John? Well, I think so. I went to the NFL from the PA, right? And so I think one of the things I do think has been an asset is that I've been on that side and worked with players. And so one of my fears when I took the position at the league was that players would no longer trust me, because now you leave, you're on the other side, and I had players say to me, first, we understand free agency, right? And second, you're more helpful to us there because you can help set policy and create the infrastructure and make sure that the clubs are doing what they're supposed to be doing to make sure that we're okay, right?
It's good business having women at the table. It's good for players. But yet there's still resistance. Allison, have you felt less resistance to you being in the room during the course of your tenure than you felt at the beginning?
I would say yes. I feel less resistance now, but I don't know if I really acknowledge the resistance at the beginning. I really don't acknowledge, while I have been the other many times over in my life and career, I don't think I entered the space acknowledging that. That's at once limiting. And so I, like has been said before, you take up space. You're there. I was there for a reason. I got there for a reason. And yeah, so no. What happened?
I think you're aware of the fact, but don't acknowledge. But
don't acknowledge. You can't. You can't. I mean, that it is what it is. It's which is why you work so hard to change and combat it. But no, I don't know. I was dropped off in Harvard Square as coming from South Carolina. Like my mom just drove off and left me there. I come from a small rural town in South Carolina. It's black and white. I was the only African American, on my team. I, played many years abroad, 17 years. Only American, only English speaker, only woman of color. So going to the NBA front office, you're once again the other, the foreigner. And so, what do? You sink or you swim. And I had many iterations of swimming and excelling. So no.
You know what? I love this.
Like,
Allison's like, yeah, no, I'm not acknowledging you, not acknowledging this. So, and it's because when you play a team sport, I had the same experience coming in, and it was my wake-up call to the NBA. Because I've been a part of teams, so when you get in there, you're shooting off stuff. You're like, all right, here we go, and you're thinking everybody's working towards the same goal. And then you figure out, wait a minute, there's other agendas in this room? Wait, we all got the same goal. We need to be moving this way. And it wasn't until somebody pulled me aside, we were having coffee, and I'm like, man, I feel this tension in the room. Is it me? And I'm trying to understand, and I really think we're all trying to work together. And he said to me, Swin, no, I said first, why when I make a comment, even when I'm kind of lukewarm on it, I don't get pushback? Like, you guys argue with each other, but nobody's saying anything. I'm like, over here, I say something, and it's like, woo, okay. And I wanted to understand what that tension was. And it wasn't until the gentleman said to me, you got to understand, they look at you as you're Swin Cash, or you've won this, or you've done that. And so they don't know how to necessarily deal with you. And you're a woman, and you just say stuff sometimes, and they're caught off guard. And I'm like, that's crazy. Because I grew up playing with guys. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. It didn't register in my mind. I had to go back and like take a step back and say, okay, how do I then enter back into this room? Because that who swing cash, whatever accolades come with it, that has to be left at the door. Whatever your accolades are have to be left at the door. If this is about business, we have to come into the room and handle business, because we're not gonna win. Because we've been on successful teams, you understand how to win. I can tell you what it looks like to win, but this isn't what it looks like. And so I realized that women, hear me out, ladies, there are gonna be times when we have to do stuff that is not fair. It's uncomfortable that I have to make you comfortable. But sometimes, walking one person at a time, you're in a room with 5 people, I'm gonna have coffee with you, not at the job. Let's go over here. I'm gonna have dinner with you, let's go over here. And you build, relationships, and you're banking, and it's not fair. We've had to do it. It's not fair, but guess what? You're trying to get to the end goal. When you have to figure out, when you come into that room, what does that room look like? What do you need to do, and how do you take up space? And that's the way that I had to take up space. Yours is probably different, yours is probably different. And that's okay. It's gonna look different, but you gotta get to it fast. And sometimes effective communication and relationship building is where it's gonna start.
To your point, sometimes when you are the only in the room, there is a huge burden and cost that comes with that. And what you're talking about to a degree is building allies, right? Like, how do you build allies and a support system so that when you walk out of the room, you get the positive reinforcement, you get the pat on the back, you get whatever you need to go back into the room. And Nyaka, you told me the story about conversations with some of the owners and how you were being addressed. Do you mind sharing that story with the crowd? You leaving out names.
Yes, share, girl.
So in my role, I often am in places where maybe I'm speaking to the coaches or to the GMs, the front office. While our players are predominantly African American, it's not reflective in the rest of the organizations. And so the first year that I was at the league and participated in our annual meeting, so this is where all the owners get together and talk about the business of the year. Of course, I'm the dais. I'm the only woman of color. And as we walk off the dais, one of the owners, so when they addressed me, it's Nyaka, and there was another PhD woman in the room, and they call her by her first name. So when we come off the dais, one of the owners leans over and he says to me, he actually put his hand right here, and he says, "Listen, in this room, I've noticed that when they address the men, they say Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so. And when they address the women, they say, and they call it by their first names." He says, "To the degree that you can speak up, make sure that never happens. Make sure you always correct them. You let them know it's Dr. NiiLampti. And to the degree that I can, when I'm in the room and your name comes up, I will do the same." Mm-hmm. And so it is one of those things where, again, part of it is, we talk about building allies and those relationships, right? It's also, doing excellent work, right? I know, regardless of how many feathers I ruffle a lot. At the end of the day, I know I do good work, and so there are people who are gonna support me and speak well of me and make sure that they are advocating for me in those spaces. But that was something that so now, when I introduce myself to people, I'm a Nyaka. And now in certain spaces, I will make sure it's Dr. NiiLampti. No, it's Dr. NiiLampti.
You make a very good point, I think subtly, about the way you embrace your space, and you came to the table with years and years and years of reps, practice, a resume. You were fortified and probably beyond reproach in getting there. I think part of the confidence and the not being aware of being the only is those many, many years of reps, the resume, the understanding that while in my head I might have a tinge of imposter syndrome, I know that I am worthy of being in the space, and have worked so damn hard to get there. That's a great story. I love that. And I'm wondering, would you have ever acknowledged that on your own? Because I know now I am hypersensitive to anyone, and I do it with the greatest amount of humility, but anyone who mistakes a title, leaves off, calls me a director instead of a VP, I'm like, kindly, it's this, because it's so important. It's so important.
First, I graduated from here how many years ago?
27.
And probably until I was mid-30s, if someone asked me where I went to school, I'd say I went to school in New Jersey.
I say Cambridge. I don't say Cambridge or Boston.
Cambridge, I mean,
I don't claim it. That's me. I'm sorry.
No. And so it's one of those things where I think, and I am like, anyone who's seen me present, I am as strong of an introvert as they come, and I could probably count the number of times I ever spoke in class when I was sitting in these halls, right? Because I'm terrified of speaking up. But what's happened is, in these spaces, like the first time that my name was on an agenda, and I looked up and I saw that the male whose terminal degree was a PhD was addressed as doctor, and mine was not. I went to the person who put the agenda together and said, I appreciate this. Understand we have the same terminal degree. If you're going to address him that way, you make sure you address me that way as well.
I'm going to translate that. Put some respect on my name. Okay. All right. I got you.
But that took me years to get to, right?
Yeah.
So.
Allison, you said something, and I'd love for the three of you, honestly, to address it, talking about feeling like, you have the twinge of imposter syndrome, but ultimately learning to feel like you belong in the spaces. That is something that so many students coming to this campus, speaking from firsthand experience, deal with, is the challenge of feeling comfortable at a place where you may not be sure that you're comfortable. What do you say to first year, second year students here who are dealing with that experience of, how do I convince myself that I actually belong here? We'll start with you, Swin.
Yeah, I would say to step outside of your comfort zone. I'm big on relationships. I'm big on meeting people that may not look like you, that may not talk like you, that don't have the same lived experience. I went to UConn, and my college roommate was Sue Bird. And I remember being in college with, you guys know her. She And I remember us going to school, and how we came into college is completely different than how we left, right? So we came into college, and my background, I grew up most of my life in the projects outside of Pittsburgh. And so what I saw as a kid growing up was completely different than what she saw as a kid growing up. And so you put us together in a dorm room, and you have to start living life and having conversations. And we found what's our common thread. And a lot of times, unless Sue and I started having those conversations, and for me, talking to people at the African American Culture Center, I was over here talking to people that were on a track team and band and orchestra, because my blend and my pod, like that was my community. I would encourage every student that steps on this campus to expand your horizons by expanding your network. That was the best thing to happen to me in college, because it made me open my eyes up to the world, and I wasn't exposed to that as a young person. Now, look, you can go on social media, we didn't have it back then, and scroll through and see all these different things, which thank God we didn't have it back then. Sorry for y'all, thankful for all of us. But that's one of the things I would say to them, for sure.
So I mentioned that I'm as strong as strong of an introvert as there is, right? If anyone's ever taken the Myers-Briggs, I have no E in my profile, no E, right? So the idea of going up to someone and sort of reaching out that way would probably have been really overwhelming to me. When I think about experiences here, I did not do a really good job of building relationships and building a network. And so what I would say, and I went to an all-black school in Mississippi. I was the first person in my school's history to go to an Ivy League school, right? I had no idea what the heck I was doing. I came in as an engineer, had no idea what I was doing here.
Sound like me. That's eerily similar. Why would you go to Harvard and be a chemical engineer?
Sorry. Okay, the E-quad. I was like, what is this? Anyway. But I think there's two things I would say to a student who doesn't feel like they belong. One is, I tell people, I realize this now, the hardest thing about Princeton is extremely difficult, sure. And there is so much support. No one here wants to see you fail. So they will do everything they can to make sure that you are successful, right? And I think that that's the benefit of schools like Princeton and Harvard, right? And so making sure, like, they will do everything. So if you do your part, they will do their part to make sure that you get out of here and have a great experience. I say the other thing is pay attention to the subtle offers of outreach. Like, I had professors who reached out, peers who reached out, and because I was probably so in my own head, I did not necessarily reciprocate, right? I take advantage of that. I remember one of my professors came to a track meet to watch me run. And again, an opportunity to cultivate an incredible relationship. And it was not something that I was that I had sort of the mental capacity or the emotional capacity to take advantage of at that time. And so I'd say, one, they will help support you to make sure that you are successful, but two, pay attention to those subtle outreaches. You don't have to necessarily go out to other people. They will come to you. Just make sure that you take advantage of it and reciprocate.
Yeah, I would definitely double down on all of that's already said. I think one thing that would have helped me through my journey and hopefully will help others is the realization that each of us has our own race to run, that comparing yourself to someone else, their trajectory to success or to failure is not your journey to success or failure. Define success as you define success. Someone else's success is not what success is for you. We preach that to our players all the time. It's so hard to disconnect from all the visibility and the presence of and the comparisons. It's really hard, and I wish I'd learned that way early. I would have saved myself some internal grief. I remember when I was transitioning from playing professionally, I retired when I was 40 years old, and if you can imagine, most of my teammates, global head of whatever at Netflix, CEO of some medical whatever, founder, and so on and so forth. And so I was in a dark, dark place trying to figure out how my many, many years of, playing and struggling abroad and, learning different languages and, playing roles on teams would translate into some entry-level job. And, thank God, I had finally found this program at the NBA that was for players to transition from playing to, off the court. And so that's really what I would convey is, it's your race, it's your own race, and don't get caught up in these comparisons.
It's all a humble journey, and it's your race, but it's a humble journey, and you'll find yourself along the way, and be okay in the failures that happen in college. Like, that's when a lot of learning is going to happen for yourself. Like, be okay, and sometimes, whether it's academic, you didn't get what you wanted to have for a semester, or it's a relationship, or something's happened with family, or just you're feeling a certain way. Like, be okay that you're going to get through it. And outreach is another thing. One of the things I wish that I would have done in college that I didn't do is I wanted to pledge Delta. And I put a lot of other things before that. That was like one of my goals when I went to school. Because I had a family member and I wanted to pledge, and for me, being part of a sorority was important, but it didn't get done. If there's something you want to have happen, explore all those opportunities. Find kind of where your moral compass is and who aligns with some of those things on campus, and you'll be okay. Like, too many times people just tell us to stay in a box. Step outside of that box, try new things, meet new people, and I'm telling you, it'll be different on the other side.
True. I went to Harvard. No disrespect to anyone's fashion sense or personal choice. I had a unibrow who was wearing shoulder pads, for example, and my mom sent me with a brooch. I don't remember anything about it. I don't remember a lot about class and day to day. I don't remember a lot about a game. Like, you'll get through it. It's gonna.
You're gonna get to the other side.
Greatness is on the other side of all that. So just trust that.
Fantastic advice. Thank you, guys. I want to pivot a little bit because one of the things that we really appreciated when we talked to each of you was your commitment to civic engagement and social justice. How have you found your voice? You work for some of the biggest brands, right? The NFL, the NBA, in the world. How have you found your voice and been able to use your platform to promote the things that are important to you?
Well, I'm obviously work for an organization that is super active in terms of social justice. We, unfortunately, but also fortunately, that we all lived through the murder of George Floyd and so many others, that we really seized an opportunity to, create some sort of, I wouldn't even say movement, a platform to, do some good in our community. I think we all represent community organizations, first and foremost, the NFL, the Pelicans. Yeah, all these teams are stewards of the community, and we're comprised of men of color. And so we have to be great representatives of how we do business and how we play the game. And so I'm just really fortunate to be able to work for an organization that is, at the forefront of all of that. And luckily for me, some of the things that we champion, like reforms in criminal justice and the legal system, is something that's super close to my heart. I have, there are four of us. My sister went to Duke, I went to Harvard. My two brothers served time in prison. My younger brother spent over half his life in prison and is still, in and out and battling with the criminal legal system. So being able to, lead or co-lead our advocacy of the raise the age reform that would gradually change the juvenile justice age in Massachusetts from 18 to 20 and keep, youth in the youth legal system longer so that they can, have access to, resources that will help them develop. We know that, once you enter the criminal legal system, your life chances are drastically altered. So I'm just, it's for me, again, about purpose. I love the game. I love the work that we do. I love, first and foremost, fighting for championships, but I also love this other, aspect of representing, one of the greatest sports franchises in history, and that is this community aspect.
I had a lot of people ask, what made you shift from being at the PA to working at the league, and I think what I like to say is it's an incredible platform to, especially if you think about the impact and the reach. I love this idea of how do we enhance mental health literacy for everyone. First, I think everyone could benefit from being on somebody's couch. But I think, especially when we think about groups of color, we know that the more mental health literacy you have, the better your emotional outcomes. I like to say that if we could get, the healthier that we can get men in the NFL to be, then that's the healthier that we can get men in this country to be, right? And families in this country to be. And so one of the things I really appreciate doing is going into communities and doing training, anything that will enhance mental health literacy, make sure people understand signs and symptoms. How does that look different in different populations, right? How do we develop language so that we are comfortable talking about mental health? I remember when I decided to go into psychology, I had someone in my family say, why would you do that? Black people don't go to therapy, right? And so, I see really the work that we are able to do as work that really enhances the mental health of the country, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think for me, look, I grew up with my mom, as I said, as one of my heroes, but also serving free lunch that we were also receiving. So I was raised to always give back. I was always raised with the scripture, to whom much is given, much is required, every day. And that was part of my foundation of who I was. So when I became a player, it was not even a doubt in my mind that I was gonna start a nonprofit. I was gonna give back. I was gonna be involved in anything that could help not only young kids, but help my community. My engagement, and I would go back to probably 2016 when you look at the time in the WNBA with the passing of Alton Sterling and George Floyd and a number of it was just a whole gambit that just happened, right? Of a lot of different things, like after like Philandro Castile, like it just kept happening. And I remember in 2016, and Steve, I believe, when we did our protest at the Garden, and it's a lot of when Black Lives Matter was happening, and the WNBA players took a stand. And I'll never forget being up like 1 o'clock in the morning. There's teams, girls that are like emotionally just spent. We're talking from Minnesota to New York to DC, and you're trying to figure out how do you mobilize. And I've never been so proud of 144 women in my life than the women of the W who stood up and said, you know what, we're going to use our platform. And we knew that we were gonna get fined. You gotta understand, there are women who are making $30,000, women who are at the high end making maybe $106,000. And you're sitting there and girls are like, I can't afford to take this fine. But in that locker room, I got you, I'll pay it, I'm playing overseas. I got her. And it just trickled down, every team. We're still standing. It's hard to get that consensus when you go from a protest to a movement unless people are committed to using your voice and having real change. And it didn't matter if you were Black, if you were white. We had women who were from Europe, from Australia, all over the globe, didn't understand what was happening in our country at the time, but they saw that their sister was hurting. And they said, we'll stand with you. There wasn't one player that did not stand. And from that time period, I realized you have to always use your platform. Each and every person in here, you have a platform. Your platform could be to 5 people, from your Instagram to your Facebook to anywhere. Anywhere you have community, you have a platform to speak your truth and to speak power to that. And I think for me, it was never an option with taking this job in New Orleans, but in a very red state of Louisiana. Now the mindset is, how do we make change in a different way? How do you support your players to still engage, whether it's at the ballot, whether it is engaging in the juvenile justice system like CJ McCollum has been doing? Like those are the positions that we're in to give power, to give resources and help, not only our team, not only our players, but also our team as we go forward. So that's how we continue to move forward.
And each of you works, again, as organizations. How do you help empower players to be comfortable doing that? Because there is some level of risk to that, too, right? How do you help them understand and become comfortable with what it means to use their platform? Because it's easier for some than for others. Like, do you talk about some can afford financial, some...
Well, now that was the W players. The NBA, they can afford it. But in that same vein, I will say education is number one. We're not forcing anything on our players. What we try to do is understand, and once you understand the business model of where their time is, how they can be impactful, what are the organizations that are doing the work right now that you can bring in and have some listening sessions? How can you align players with the right organizations that want to support their communities? And what I've seen is players that want to be engaged, they may not have all the answers, but they want to talk to people who are doing the work. Like, this isn't just for optics. I don't come to do optics because I live it every single day. I have two boys, 6 and a 3-year-old. And I'm walking through the airport and everybody's like, oh, you're the cutest little thing out there. Look at them cheeks. My baby's daddy's 6'7", One of them gonna be 7 foot. Think about that. They're cute now, but when they get tall, they're still black, they're still big, and there's some people that I gotta walk around in this country who can look at them, still have them big old cheeks, but are afraid of them. That's the reality as a mother I live in every day. You telling me I can't go to my job and have a conversation with people that have a huge megaphone that can create real change, that can have these tough conversations? There's no agenda pushing. This is about community, all of us in here. If I want to see the world be better for my boys, I need to invest not only in myself, but at my job, at my church, at my community, at my salon. Like, it doesn't just go away, y'all. I don't have a switch where I can just turn it off. We live this every single day. And I embrace it because God has blessed me to be here, and every day above ground is a good day. So that's how I approach it every single day.
Well, we really don't have to, I don't think we have to push the players to do anything. I think the players are at the forefront of it. It's just specifically in my organization, I work alongside, Jaylen Brown, for example, who during the pandemic drove from Boston to Atlanta to lead a march, in the middle of the pandemic. And the guys hopped on a Zoom and, with ownership and other stakeholders in our organization to map out a plan for creating a social justice and racial equity platform. It's just, we had Grant Williams most recently, who maybe is one of the biggest NBA player advocates for the WNBA. Our guys are at the forefront of leading the charge, and a lot of them really have clear their personal agenda and are cognizant of the work that needs to be done. So,
Can I just say something? I just want you to finish, Allison, real quick, because people don't realize in your position, in my position, in our positions, you're sometimes in rooms where you have to have conversations to advocate, because maybe they don't understand why the players are doing some of the things this way, or they want to be involved. And that's why it's good, and it goes back to good business sense of having a diversity of thought in those rooms, in those decision-making rooms, when people are trying to build consensus about how do we show up in these spaces. I know I deal with it, but I think also if you can just speak to why it's important for you to sit in a room when you're talking about Jaylen driving down to lead a protest and everybody's like, what is going on? Where's he going? Like, why is it important for you to be in that room?
Yeah, I know that my world is not representative of the broader world. Luckily for us, we kind of get it, but at the same time, unless you have had some sort of, most of the time, not all the time, I don't want to make that assumption, but if you haven't had a shared experience, it's hard for you to really feel what someone else is feeling, that empathy aspect. And so you're right, having had these shared experiences, you can translate, because it's a type of translation, why players might be motivated to do certain things. So.
And because I do have the opportunity to sort of get a sense of the culture across all 32, I think I would echo players, I think, all want to do something. They aren't necessarily sure what that looks like. And so one of the things I try to encourage the clinicians at each of the teams to do is really to engage with the players around both the pros and the cons, right? To sort of say, hey, understand you want to give, you want to do, you want to stand up, you want to speak out. Excellent, we're here to support you. Understand that these are the risks that you're taking, and understand, these are the benefits. And, we struggled with a lot of players who experienced a lot of guilt because they didn't feel comfortable with maybe, some more overt ways of protesting or sharing their perspective. And so what we've really tried to get the clinicians to engage with them around, well, there are multiple ways that you can give, that you can contribute, right? And so don't think that there's only one way that you can participate, that you can put your voice in the room and use your platform for impact. But I think that's something, because again, in my role, I get to sort of get a sense of what all, there's some clubs where I'd say, hey, you know what, they're going to support that, go for it. We like to say that 32 teams run 32 different ways, and so there are some clubs where the risk that you're taking might be a little bit more significant, and so again, let's be thoughtful about that.
We want to leave some time for audience questions in just a minute, but just sum up with one or two more questions. When you look back on your time as student athletes, specifically during the undergraduate time, are there skills or experiences from that time that have shaped how you approach your work right now?
I would say yes, for sure. I mean, we all know there are no athletic scholarships in Ivy League, so you are more than likely working a work-study job or two. I had two of them. On top of studying and playing a sport, that's not easy. And you sort of learn to be a jack of all trades. And so I, without a doubt, use all of that daily. I've never been stretched outside of my comfort zone like I was at Harvard. And so that's just a part of the existence, but it's also a part of what makes us successful at what we do, because we've done a little bit of everything, not to mention being a mother. Wasn't as a student athlete, but you just add on those layers of, shit, I can do anything. I've prepped for this. I've done way worse than this, so.
I would say for my time at UConn, what really, I think, helped me was the drive of the culture. So, at the time when I went to UConn, I'm a little seasoned right now. I'm not old, I'm just a little seasoned. They had only won one national championship. Yeah, Carla, yeah. Shout out. The Barus in here. Yeah, you can give it up for her. Your girls better be clapping. Y'all want to be running tomorrow. Y'all better be clapping. So I remember going to UConn, and there was this thing where, look, we won a national championship, and we came in with, some still talk about one of the best recruiting classes at UConn, and there was this expectation of us coming in, and in our brain, we thought we were going to win 4 national championships. Didn't realize how hard that was going to be. But we came in, and we had this class, and the style of play was going to change. And so we were running up and down the floor. It was the pressing, and it went from Rebecca and Carol Walters of having big post players, where now it's no, we're getting it off the glass and we're bringing it up into 4 and 5, and it was a change. And what I learned in that moment about the cultural piece of winning is the attention to detail. And I think back on my experience at UConn and why it was so challenging. Every single day, Coach was honest about something small that had nothing to do with us winning. And yes, you know this, Carla. It was more irritating. It was more getting you out of the comfort zone, but it was the attention to detail that helped me where I am today. So when I'm working and I'm driving we're trying to get done, or having conversations with our guys, it is always about the attention to detail drives the culture of winning for you, because you care about the small things. So in the big moments, all those things are already handled. And that was the first time I had that lived experience of, if you get a 3.0 or higher, you're coming out and you're going to go on a court and get recognized. And if anybody was by that blue door over there, you didn't want to be there. And I'm like, who would do that? Who would do that and divide a group? But it was no, if you're going to work your butt off, you're going to get over here, or you're going to come stand over here until you can get with the 3.0 to be on this side of it. So it's the small stuff like that that really helped me mentally build my toughness. Because that was culturally what it was at school.
I think I would definitely, I had two work-study jobs, practice. I remember trying to, saying, oh, what must it be like to go to the library after class and just study, right? But I think that idea of having to balance so much being pulled in so many different directions. I think I mentioned that I went to an all-black high school. Coming here, was certainly the most diverse place I'd ever been. Coming from the South where, again, it's very, very black or white. It really made me very comfortable in almost any setting, right? So like you can drop, I had someone tell me once that they've never seen someone who can speak to owners and GMs and coaches and then turn around and speak to players in a way that they can hear them as well, right? And so that range, because I think of both athletics and being here, and I'd also say that to this day, my closest friends are still folks who I ran track with. And so, so even that sense of support, I think those are some of the things that I took with me from my experiences here as a student athlete. And then John likes to talk about my mean mug.
She was terrifying as a freshman, let me tell you. But she's wonderful. All right, we've got time for some questions from the audience. Don't be shy. Over here.
So first of all, thank you all for this very engaging conversation and talk. When I saw the three of you were going to be speaking, I drove up from DC. My name is Hadia Green. I'm class of 1998. I was a year behind in Nyaka on the track and field team, and I played volleyball at Princeton too.
Humble brag. Can we give it up for her? Go, girl.
I say that to say from who my lens is from. This my lens, because when you mention the salaries of the WNBA players to this day, it's not a surprise. It's not a surprise, nor is it something I didn't know. I still get a visceral response, a negative visceral response, and I'm trying to get out of my ego about that. But I really, and someone who focuses on structural racism in my work, and it screams to the structural sexism that's in the sport. And I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that in general, but also now that we have NIL deals for children, some of which are children and some are older, how that does or doesn't affect that transition from either high school to college or high school to pros, however the direction would be. But if there clearly still is, and even I have a freshman in college now, the girls aren't getting the same thing that the guys are as far as NIL deals, and it doesn't matter if the girl's a phenom, just like the phenom guys that are working with. So just wondered if you had any thoughts on any of that.
I'm going to defer as a as a member of the Board of Governors. I will not be commenting. I will say this. I have an 18-year-old who's about to go to college, and she's a pretty good basketball player. And as a former, athlete, and just, yeah, it's good to know that she might come out of school and not have to worry, I was in debt, thousands and thousands of dollars in debt when I came out of college, and that generational thing will not be on her head. I am ecstatic, so that's all I'm saying.
Well, I called UConn to figure out how I was going to get my money back. Because we left some money on the table. I told them, y'all got new business schools, all these different things, but my goodness, those NIL deals. Yes, the women are still behind in getting money. But if you look at the top receivers of NIL deals, they are women. Now, has it been spread out enough or at different levels of universities? No. But there is a shift happening right now that we are seeing, and I can say this because I've consulted with Fortune 500 companies that are figuring out that there are women's sports right now, where it's going, and everybody's trying to jump in. How do I get in? What does it look like? Somebody tell me, what does it look like? It looks like women's sports. That's what it looks like. It looks like if you put us on TV, you're gonna get the returns you want. It looks like if you actually tell a story and storytell around somebody, you're gonna get the results that you want. And so I think for years, as we played in the WNBA, we were beating our head up against the wall because we're saying these things. I don't need to be in a skirt to sell you that I got game, okay? No, don't have to do that. I don't need to tell you how I can put on makeup to say that I can play the game. And so I think where we're at now is at a point where people want to understand how they can invest in women's sports. The athletes are now demanding a lot more, and because they have their own brands in social media and platforms, they're becoming more knowledgeable about how to use that to better access and unlock some of this capital that's there. And that's what I'm seeing, and that's why you have some of these bigger brands that are asking the questions.
That's a great answer. Other questions? Oh, over here.
Hi, thank you so much. We've been over here trying not to comment. This is if you hear the that's from us, this group over here. But my question is, I work over at the plasma physics lab across yonder, and just like you, even though I work here, when people ask where I work, I say at a university. I don't say because people have a tendency to judge. But when you talk about allies in the workplace, how do you identify who is a true ally? Well, I say that because you said somebody pulled you aside. So how do you know that person was really an ally versus someone who, could just pull you aside or start talking and then you find out that they're just not on don't have the same agenda?
Well, so just speaking for myself,
Nyaka.
so there's a couple of things. I like to say I have one of the things I have learned is I have a great bullshit meter, right? So I do think that is part of it. And part of this is probably why I'm a psychologist, right? I was the kid who could walk into the room and feel everybody's feelings and emotions, and that's not necessarily always a good thing. Trust. So I do think that that's part of it. Understanding when someone's coming at me and knowing, okay, this person has an ulterior motive, and I might still engage in a conversation, but I'm keeping you here, right? And this person here seems to be careful in terms of how they're approaching me, but seems to be approaching me from a stance of I want to be helpful. I also, so I think that, and that's just how I'm wired, I think, right? So there is that, but then I think that I've also, we have an interesting organization, and so there are times where I might get second or third hand information from someone else about what someone else has shared about me when I'm not in the room, right? About the quality of work that I provide, that I produce, and so that's how I've also learned who are maybe low-key allies that I don't necessarily have a day-to-day interaction with, but I could probably benefit from going and developing a closer relationship, right? So it's taking information from multiple sources and checking the consistency of that. And then deciding, okay, here's somebody who can be, who I know has my best interest at heart and might be a good person who that I could sort of connect with. But I might pose that to both of you.
I don't know. I try to look at how a person moves. What's the body of work? Like, are you showing up for others? Are you being inclusive? Are you letting me know, hey, we're having a meeting at 10 a.m. to discuss some trades? Make sure you're there. Are you consulting to get my input on important decisions? Those types of things show where your intentions are. And I think that those types of things are a great judge of a person's, true character in terms of allyship.
Mm. And I just think for my own personal psyche, like I genuinely go into conversations, and if somebody brings me something, I'm thinking that you have good intentions. It's not immediately like a negative thing, but I'm also a big believer that, and probably because of the faith side of me as well, like my grandma used to always say, like, I have a level of discernment that just is just there. Like, she was just, this is your gift. And I eventually feel that, to your point, it will come back around and you find out if somebody's code switching. What I like to say is, if you're coming to me, you're trying to get close, get information, and then you're going back over here. Everybody knows the office politics. You got it on campus too. You can be in your group and there's like politics, even in your dorm room, and you're like, what are we doing? But the good thing about that is people can't move me off of my square. And so how allies show up is also, are you speaking about me in a room? Are you advocating in a way? Am I sitting in a room with you and we just had a conversation out there and we're talking about something, then we get in the room and then your tone changes and you see how the room is, so you jump to the other side. For me, that immediately sends you the signal. So you give people opportunities to either show up or they can show out the door. And that's how it is for me. It doesn't mean that we can't work together. It just means there's a bus and I know where to put you out on my bus. And that's how we move and operate. And it's not you're not angry about it. You're just being wise and protecting. Like my mom always say, guard your peace. And that's at your job, it's in your family, it's at your church, anywhere. And that's just, for me, it's the best way to operate.
Good. Jack.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will say that I think we believe we had a shot. I think we felt slighted to get a 16 seed. I think our record was pretty decent that year, that we thought we deserved a little bit better. But the preparation not only was that week before the game, it was all season, really. That's one of the reasons why we felt so great. I think one of the beauties of that team and just one of the major learnings from that coach was act as if your role is the most important role on the team. So everyone had her role down pat and really embraced it. We had 16 players at the time, imagine that, and it was not easy for the women who didn't play a lot. So I think the preparation, starting from the start of the season to everybody embracing the role, to just showing up when in that moment was really how we entered that game. I was the leading scorer in the country at the time, led the country in scoring that year, and
Humble brag.
and yeah, it was just about showing up. It was just about showing up. That was a fun moment, not just for Harvard basketball. It was really a legitimizer for Ivy League basketball. We certainly weren't the most talented team, but the way we worked together and embraced the system and believed in the system was, it was beautiful.
Mr. Johnson in the back.
Thanks a lot, Dad. Okay, so Dr. NiiLampti, in your bio, it says that your thesis is focused on the psychological impact sports can have on women. And I was just wondering what you found like the most prominent psychological impact sports have on Black women that you don't find as commonly in men.
Great question.
So this was my senior thesis 27 years ago?
27, yes.
So kudos to you. So it was, and you guys are way too young for this. So Nike did this whole series on If You Let Me Play, like women in sports. And so I was in love with those ads. Like, so I would tear them out of the magazines, put them on my wall, right? And so, I think that was what sort of led me to explore that for my senior thesis. But, you know, the research is pretty clear. Women who play sports, especially if you can get them through age 12 through 13, because that's where you see the dropout for a lot of different reasons. You know, lower chances of becoming teenage mothers. You've got, you know, more leadership. You know, there's a lot of research that looks at women who are CEOs, and it said something like 70 to 90% of those women were athletes at some point, right? So there's a lot of research that really supports, you know, all of those intangible transferable skills that women who play competitive sports get exposure to in a way that I think is both different from folks who don't play sports, and also different from men. Because, you know, women aren't socialized in a way to be competitive or to, you know, the tenacity, those kinds of things. And so I think sport is one of the unique places where you can teach that. I think what's sad, what has become sad is that over the last few years, we've seen some of the trends in terms of the psychological benefits. You've seen some decrease there because, you know, particularly as youth sport has become so commercialized, and early specialization and all these other things. So you're seeing some of that shift, but at its core, if you get good coaching, there's some benefits that will keep women for the rest of their lives. That's a good question.
Time for one more question right here. Yep, you looking around.
No pressure. Mic drop moment.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sally, same first and last name, long story. But I'm a sophomore finance major. I go to TCNJ, so I actually took an Uber down here. Let me just say, you guys are worth every single penny. I want to say thank you for being vulnerable.
That man around him.
Every single penny and more. And I want to, first off, just say thank you for being so vulnerable and giving us all authentic answers and making sure that, you know, we really got the most out of this lecture. I'm also a filmmaker and photographer, and one of my fears right now is that despite all the work that I put in, and despite my talent, and despite what I'm able to produce, that I'll be overlooked, and that, you know, 10, 20 years from now, I'm gonna look back and none of my stuff is gonna matter. So my question for you guys is, in your journey to success, how did you kind of deal with any doubts of being overlooked because of your color or your gender? Just, if you had any doubts, how did you stay persistent through that to get you to where you are now?
End on an easy question.
Man, I just want to say,
I don't know what to do with this, I'm sorry.
we don't either. As you can see, we're live. I applaud you for showing up here. I think first and foremost, you have to see yourself in places that it's hard though, you have to see yourself in places that you don't know exist, and showing up where decision makers are, where influencers are, stepping outside your comfort zone. I don't know how comfortable you are, you know, getting up speaking. I sure wasn't, so I applaud you for that. You gotta be persistent. You gotta be persistent. You gotta accept that as a part of your path. There's gonna be a lot of resistance. It may feel like swimming with a fire hose, you know, or coming at you, whatever, if you understand the analogy. It's hard. It's not easy. You gotta be persistent with it. And so I would shake every tree. I would look up every organization that you're interested in, you know, email your work, reach out to the people who are working there, reach out to friends of friends of friends to try to get, you know, in touch with people. It's a persistence. I don't know what your guys' journeys were like, but that's what it is. I would love to say that I made a phone call one day and said, hey, I'm finishing playing and can you hire me? I didn't do that. I didn't want to do that. because it wouldn't feel right. Not saying you shouldn't do that, but it's about the grind. It's about being persistent with it. I don't know if that is any way helpful. It's probably the last thing you want to hear, but I don't know any other recipe other than to roll your sleeves up and grind it out.
And I'd say it's definitely the persistence. I'd say like, if you had told me 10 years ago that I would be the Vice President of Wellness and Clinical Services, which is a sexier title than it really is, right? I'll tell you that. It sounds sexy. It's not that sexy. I would have never, like, it was not my goal to get to this job, right? I loved what I was doing, and I took advantage of every opportunity that came in front of me, and built relationships and had a great community of folks who also were familiar with my work. And so that's that persistence. It's loving what I'm doing, but it's also your question was, how do you overcome the doubts? Like, I still have doubts, right? So you're not going to get to a point where you are no longer doubtful. It's how do you still do the work and become and submit and email and reach out, even with those doubts that are present, right? Every time that there's a new task or a new challenge, I'm like, oh my, can I do this, right? But the previous work that you've done reminds you that you can, and don't let the presence of the doubt stop you from continuing to move forward.
Yeah, I echo with what both women said. I would say you can doubt what you do, you never doubt who you are. And so the work, the passion that you have day in and day out, that's what you pursue every day. Do what you want, your passion, your work, put the work in. And then eventually you may get to a position. The only reason why I'm up here today is because I worked at Turner. I was in media. I had a good life. I had a baby with my husband, doing what I wanted to do and loved. And I worked with my current boss in media. And we had a relationship. We would talk about hoops and everything in the green room. We talk about life. And I was walking out the door one day, and he said, "Hey, yo, Swin." He said, "I'm interviewing for some of these jobs. If I get one, I'm calling you." And I said, "Okay, good luck," and walked out the door. I had no idea that at the time we're having these conversations, we had only been working together for a couple months, that he was evaluating and having conversations with me based off of, yeah, I'm about to go do a job, and that's the person I want to come with me. So as you're putting in the work, you're never doubting yourself, you're never turning your back on the people that you're meeting. You're building your network, because you never know who's going to come knocking and give you that yes. You only need one. That's all you need is one. Everybody thinks you have to have a yes and everything has to be lined up like this. No, you don't. You never know. All you need is one. You can doubt the work. Maybe I'm doing this job, I want to pivot, but never doubt who you are. So that's my advice.
Swin and Nyaka, Allison, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. It has been worth all the months of planning and preparation, and we can't thank you enough for sharing with us tonight. I think all of us leave here better for having listened to the three of you. So thank you so much for sharing with us tonight.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.